Hello, welcome back to Toy Thursday with Johnny Tiger on September 23rd, 2021. This week we have another honorable mention in the fantasy mythological genre, and now we are going quite far back in time and looking at another branch of mythology and old deities. But first, take a look at this little display, little diorama in front of the camera. At least I hope you guys can see it. I mean, using an iPhone 11 now, so hopefully the camera is improved somewhat. Uh, if it's not viewable, please let me know so I can make adjustment accordingly. So this little diorama is a little scene of a carnage, a battle. It's a grassy field. In the middle, there's a head, like a skull of a giant. And on the side, you can see the little skeleton of a dwarf with a sword through its chest. And then on the other side, there's a skeleton of a more human-sized warrior. And on the ground, also there are shields and swords and helmets and axes scattered about. Uh, Many action figures can look very impressive themselves and definitely deserve to uh, open a video with. And some of them, like one of our previous contenders, have weapons so magnificent and huge that the weapons or the accessories can open the show. But not too many action figures can claim to have a display base that is impressive enough, interesting enough to open the show with. Today's character is one such action figure. This little diorama, you see this carnage, this battlefield, is actually the display base for the action figure. It is not very big, which is even more impressive. This display base, the skulls and skeletons and shields and axes and all that stuff, all together is barely bigger than my hand. So it is not very big. It's a little bit larger than one of those little plates you put your teacup on. And yet, the maker, which was ToyBiz, was able to cram so much detail into such a small display that you look at this and you kind of get a sense of what happened. You kind of can, in your head, make up your own idea, your own series of events of how this battle might have went down. So that is very, very impressive. It's a good example of not everything have to be big to be detailed. Sometimes things can be small enough that it doesn't take up a lot of shelf space, and yet it's detailed enough to be very interesting. Now, this base does create a little bit of a conundrum, a dilemma in my mind, because it is so detailed, so interesting, that it seems like the kind of thing that you should hang on a wall so people can actually admire all the details on its own. But it is the display base for the action figure, and so most of the time, if you see it at all, you would only see maybe a little bit of the front part of it, and you would be looking down. So you wouldn't see a lot of details when it's being used in the way that it was intended to, which is, yeah, definitely problematic. It's a little bit of a waste of all this detail when it's being shielded and covered by the action figure uh, himself. And it definitely get covered because the action figure that stands upon it, the one character that stands on this battlefield of fallen giant and vanquished enemy, is quite a large character himself. If you have been following the Marvel cinematic Marvel movies in the past 10, 15 years, then this guy needs no introduction whatsoever. I mean, there's been three, maybe four, maybe five, depending on how you count them, movies made with him prominently in the center of the action. This is none other than Thor, the Thunder God. Now, while Thor the Thunder God has gained a lot of notoriety in Marvel Comics, being part of the hero team Avengers, being one of the mightiest mightiest deities in the Marvel Universe, there are a lot of things that are different from Marvel Comic and the original Norse mythology of Thor the Thunder God. And today, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a talk about what's different and how, in many ways, the original Thor the Thunder God might be even more quirky and interesting than the Marvel comic version of this gigantic muscular character. Thor, the thunder god, hails from Norse mythology. So that's the Vikings, a Germanic people, a very, very old uh, type of religion and set of mythological beings. While in Marvel comic, Thor is half brother to Loki, and they were the two children. Actually, they have a sister too that showed up in a later movie, Hela. Hela, by the way, is not part of Norse mythology, or at least that character they showed in the movie. There's nothing like her in the original Norse mythology. There was a there was a character or deity called Hel, who was the ruler of Hell in Norse mythology, but that's it's very very convoluted. It got nothing to do with Hela in the movie. So in in the movie, Odin, the father of all gods, the All Father himself, basically the Norse mythology version of Lord Buddha or Zeus, uh, basically their leader god. So Odin in Marvel Comics has three children, with Hela, Thor, and Loki. Uh, in the original Norse mythology, Loki has nothing to do with that family tree whatsoever. Loki is from a completely different family tree. Loki is still the trickster god, but he is not related to Thor. And in the original Norse mythology, Thor has many half brothers and half sisters, not just two. So that's one of the first biggest difference we can see between the original Norse mythology versus the version we see in Marvel comic and Marvel cinematic movies. Well, in the Marvel comic, Thor is depicted as blonde and uh, tall, muscular. That part is no different from Norse mythology, the original Norse mythology. However, the original Norse mythology, Thor did not have blonde hair. The original Norse mythology, Thor has red hair and red beard. However, he was still tall and muscular. Uh, he was the strongest of all the gods in the original Norse mythology. So we often see in Marvel comic, and in Marvel Cinematic Universe, how there have been deities, Odin himself, for example, who is portrayed to be stronger than Thor. That is inaccurate to the original Norse mythology. To the original Norse mythology, there's just no one stronger than Thor. Thor is the god of thunder and lightning, the god of storm, and Thor is physically the strongest of all of them. He was actually a bit of a problem solver uh, for for all the gods. Like whenever the gods got invaded or there's a problem that needed to be solved by physical force, Thor was the one that they called upon to deal with situations because Thor was just strong. He's just like strongest, stronger than even Odin himself. That did not mean that he was the wisest or the best leader. That just made him that guy who can bench press 2,000 pounds and who can solve any kind of problem for you as long as that problem can be solved by crushing or bashing or smashing through it. In Marvel comic, Thor, in order for Odin to recognize him as worthy of the title of the leader of gods, Thor was sent to the mortal world to live like a mortal, to love like a mortal, so he could learn how to be humble and how to have humility. That was a trial that he had to go through before gaining the mantle of the Thunder God. That whole nonsense never happened in the original Norse mythology. In the original Norse mythology, the gods, Odin himself, the other gods, they weren't really concerned with Thor needing to be humble or learn humility. They just wanted Thor to solve problems if there's problem that he needed to solve. So in the original Norse mythology, Thor was this red-haired, red-bearded giant of a god that spent his time fornicating with women, and when he got bored with that, he'd go out and pick fights with giants for fun. I mean, that's how incredibly badass this guy was. Other gods like to drink. Other gods like to do their play politics. Other gods like to uh, uh, deal with the life and death of mortal. But this guy go out of his way to find to find trolls and giants and dragons so he could fight. That's Thor in the original Norse mythology. Uh, it's not quite as heroic or noble as we see in Thor, the Thunder God in Marvel Comics. It is because of his propensity for sex and violence. Thor, in the original Norse mythology, was known as the god of thunder, god of lightning, god of storm, and also god of fertility. While when we look at Thor as depicted in Marvel comic and Marvel superhero movies, we recognize him only usually by his red cape, his winged silver helmet, and the hammer, the enchanted hammer in his hand, which is called Mjolnir. I believe that's how you pronounce that. Mjolnir is a magical hammer, which has a rather bland story in Marvel comic. It's just this, like the Excalibur. Only the person who is worthy can pick it up. And then Thor, being the Thunder God, and after he proven himself, he picked it up and he became the Thunder God. That's basically all we heard about Mjolnir, the magical hammer. However, in the original Norse mythology, things are a little bit different. In the original Norse mythology, Thor has three pieces of artifact on his person. One is a hammer Mjolnir, which we'll come back and discuss in a little bit. Second is the belt of power. What is a belt of power? It's a big, wide, like a weightlifter's belt that he wore, and the belt of power magnifies Thor's already godly power uh, to twice its original amount, so made him twice as strong. And third, because to wield the hammer Mjolnir, which is a hammer that can produce lightning, by the way, Thor needed special gloves to be able to use the hammer. Thor, in original Norse mythology, also wore a pair of iron gloves that allow him to wield the enchanted hammer. In some depictions, Thor has been seen using a magical staff as well, but that was very, very rarely seen. Now, let's take a look at the origin of this enchanted hammer, Mjolnir. The original story goes something like this. One day, The trickster god, Loki, who was devious and sneaky and just very annoying in general, woke up and decided that he was feeling particularly devious that day, and he wanted to play a trick on Thor's wife, the goddess Sif. The goddess Sif, who has a lot of titles and things she does herself, but we are not going to go into details in this video. We will see Sif in some future episode, but we will focus on the story for now. Anyway, so Loki decided that it would be fun to play a trick on Sif. So he snuck around and somehow was able to cut off all Sif's hair when she was sleeping. Now this made Thor rather angry. So angry, in fact, that Thor went to Loki uh, and was threatening to do violence onto the trickster god. Well, basically, Thor said that he was going to break every single bone in Loki's body unless Loki could find a way to restore Sif's beautiful golden hair. Uh, Now, I'm not sure like what's going on there. Like you would think being a goddess herself, Sif would be able to restore her hair by like just I don't know, a wave of her hand, or maybe take a bath in some magical water. But I guess things didn't work that way. So anyway, her hair got cut off, and now she's really unhappy, which made Thor really, really unhappy. And now Loki was kind of scared because, like I said, in the original Norse mythology, there's just no arguing with Thor. Thor is the strongest there is. Just no other god can stop Thor. If Thor really wanted to tear Loki to pieces, so Loki promised Thor that he was going to go find the most skilled craftsman and craft a brand new head of hair for Sif. Can you even craft hair? Well, I guess if you're a god, that's possible. Anyway, that's what he did. Loki went into the core of the earth, really, really deep down into the core of the earth, and found the most skilled craftsmen in the dwarven kingdom. He found some master crafter dwarves and asked them to craft Sif's new hair for her. But Loki, being kind of uh, I don't know, just like always out for trouble, always trying to uh, do more than necessary. He didn't stop there. He also was able to trick the dwarves into crafting a few gifts that he used to buy himself back into the god's favor. Yeah, because remember, uh, they were really mad at him because he cut off Sif's hair and pissed off Thor, and I imagine with Thor being the god of storm, god of thunder, when he was pissed off, the weather was really bad, so pissed off all the other gods too. So anyway, Loki got the dwarves to craft some of the most powerful artifacts in the universe and use those as gifts to get himself back into the good graces of the gods. And one of these was the magical hammer Mjolnir, which he gave to Thor to calm Thor down uh, as a little token of apology. Um, Now, there's no mention in the original Norse mythology that Mjolnir can fly and uh, when you throw it, it come back like a boomerang, or it can only be picked up by the worthy, uh, the person who's worthy. No, the original Norse mythology, Mjolnir, the magical hammer, can only be used by Thor because Thor was the only person strong enough to wield it in battle. That's how heavy the hammer was. It got nothing to do with who's worthy. It got nothing to do with how pure their heart was. It's pure muscle. The Thor was the only person who could lift that much weight and use it in battle. Uh, and also, Mjolnir, in the original Norse mythology, was able to spit out lightning and smash through almost anything. In addition, Mjolnir also gave Thor the ability to bring the dead back uh, to life in some limited capacity. Uh, what are those limited capacity and what did Thor use that power for? Keep watching and we'll get to that. This action figure of Thor was actually made long before the Thor movies were made. This is an old action figure. This action figure was made, I believe, 2002, so it's almost 20 years old now, and it was made by ToyBiz in the very beginning of the now very successful, one of the most successful run of action figure line called Marvel Legends. I mean, Marvel Legends it has been a staple for action figure collectors, giving us the most wanted Marvel superheroes and Marvel supervillains for the past 20 years. It has continued despite the original company that owned the property had went under and it went to Hasbro. And even then, despite a lot of collectors thinking that Marvel Legend was going to be crap after going to Hasbro, Hasbro was able to do even better than Toy Biz, and Marvel Legend is still going strong. And yeah, they are able to get a lot of my money every year, but that's another story for another day. Um, so uh, this action figure of Thor, was made in the very beginning of Marvel Legend by ToyBiz. He stands over 7 inches tall, which is really big, considering uh, most other characters back then were just a little bit bigger than 6 inches. So he stands a full inch and a half taller than everybody, and he is really bulky. Uh, the red cape is rubber, however, it is rather stiff. So if you want Thor to get into any super dynamic low stances or lunges, he can't. His cape will get in the way. However, the cape does serve as a uh, nice little prop to allow him to stand up. It will prop him up if you bend his legs so he's in a little bit of a squat. The bottom of his cape will touch the ground, and the cape will help support his weight. And that is really important because this action figure, despite being really well made for its time, has some uh, really serious downfalls as well. Looking at the frontal view of the figure, we see that Thor is sporting some serious muscles. He has huge, massive chest, tree trunk arms with vein uh, popping up from his muscles, and he has a silvery winged helmet on his head. From the bottom of the helmet, we see some dirty blonde hair spilling out. If you get a closer look at his face, he actually looks a little bit like Arnold Schwarzenegger, I was told. On his feet, he wears leather wrapped boots. Uh, the chest, the upper torso, is encased in a kind of a rubbery material to give him that little extra bit of bulk befitting the god of thunder. I didn't realize that Aslan was blocking the camera, so probably all you saw, you didn't see any of that bulging muscles, you just saw the cat of thunder rather than the god of thunder. So we're going to leave Thor standing in this uh, frontal view for a little bit longer so you guys can see the sculptural details on this guy. Thor sports about 30 points of articulation, which sound like a lot, but there's some serious problem with this guy. First, a lot of these joints don't work properly because of the way he is designed. For example, his arms don't bend a lot because, well, honestly, if you have biceps that big, your arm wouldn't bend that much either. His head can't really tilt or nod, because his long hair really prevents the movement of his head. Like I already mentioned, he can't really get into any deep squats or deep stances because of the back of his cape is going to push against the ground, and the shoulder portion of his cape also prevent his arm being able to lift up very convincingly. It, but all that could be overlooked, maybe, but he has a fatal problem. He has super loose hip joints, which is already annoying if it's a small action figure, but on a big bulky guy like this, loose hip is no-no. Like it's just so frustrating to get this guy to stand up and hold any kind of cool poses. His hip joints are loose enough that, excuse me, excuse my hand. Usually I try not to show my hand in front of the camera, but let me illustrate this. If I hold the figure and shake him, you can you can see his leg wobbling, just whipping back and forth, back and forth. Okay, that's a no-no. Like, an action figure shouldn't do that. Like the joint shouldn't do that. Like the joint should be tight enough that just shaking it shouldn't make the leg kick back and forth like that. So that is one serious downfall with this particular action figure. He comes with his hammer, Mjolnir, and that beautiful, very detailed base that we saw in the beginning of the show. Now, Mjolnir is looking kind of beat up. It's all pitted and damaged, which is accurate because someone like Thor is always trying to hit some enemy with a hammer. So this hammer has cracked many skulls and probably has been smashed against things that it wasn't meant to be. So the hammer is looking a bit worse for wear. Uh, for the most part, it is a nice hammer, but uh, it too has its problems. One, the handle is a little bit stubby and short, making it uh, looking a little bit like those hammers or mallet you see at the whack-a-mole game. So it's not very majestic looking. Second, the material it's made from is a little soft. So depending on how he's holding the hammer, eventually, especially when the weather gets hot, it's going to start drooping, which create uh, some problem regarding to uh, posing options. While our Marvel superhero Thunder God Thor is often seen flying into battle, smashing his way through his enemies with nothing but him and his trusty hammer Mjolnir, and he spouting some very virtuous, archaic nonsense that no one else can understand. The original Norse mythology Thor didn't really fly into battle in that way. The original Norse mythology Thor was known to ride into battle on a special chariot that was drawn by a pair of magical, uh, godly goats. Yeah, you heard me right, goats. Not horses, not oxen, not donkeys, the Thunder God rode into battle on a chariot drawn by a pair of magical goats, which on its own is already kind of ridiculous to contemplate. But remember when I talked about the hammer Mjolnir gives Thor the ability to resurrect the dead, to bring the dead back uh, to life? Well, this is apparently what the Thunder God put that power to use. You see, Thor like to fornicate, like to have sex. Thor like to drink. Thor like to fight. Which means Thor expend a lot of energy. Which means Thor was usually getting hungry very often. So whenever Thor got hungry, he would butcher his magical goats and he would eat them for supper. After he was full, he would then use his magical hammer to resurrect them, make them whole again, so they could pull his chariot and he go fight another battle. And then when the next meal come around and he get hungry, he kill them, eat them again, and then resurrect them again afterward. I mean, tell me if that's messed up or not. Now, before we bid farewell to this episode and the Thunder God Thor, I want to leave you guys with what, uh, to me at least, was the most interesting fact about Thor the Thunder God. You see, when the Germanic people first adopted the Roman calendar as their standard calendar, they made some changes to how the Roman people labeled their week, their day, and months. In the Roman calendar, original Roman calendar, there's a day that was labeled Day of Jupiter, basically Day of Zeus. Now, when the Germanic people took it over, they changed it to Thor's Day. And yes, if you already guessed it, Thursday is how we end up with Thursday every week. So you see, the Thunder God is still with us even today.